All right, guys, so we got to talk about the mainstream liberal media. Once again, reminding us of why they're just simply not a credible or serious source of information, okay? Because they will peddle any conspiracy theory from the Democrat Party while also lecturing us on the dangers of conspiracies, on the dangers of coming up with conclusions that are not backed by real facts and evidence. However, that is not going to stop NBC from peddling this new narrative coming from the far left about voter ID laws. You guys remember before, voter ID is supposed to be racist, okay? Because according to the left, black people are too dumb to be able to figure out how to get IDs or do anything, really. I mean, Joe Biden basically said that black people are too dumb to use a computer, okay, or to figure out how to go and get vaccinated. But yeah, voter ID laws are racist, and now apparently, according to NBC, voter ID laws may also be transphobic as well. Take a look.
Good to see you. And as Gen Z gears up to hit the polls, transgender voters are concerned they might be blocked from casting their ballots.
Yeah, that's because a growing number of states are enforcing stricter voter identification laws that disproportionately impact the community.
NBC Out reporter Joe Yurcaba joins us now with more on this. Joe, good morning to you. So first of all, how can voter ID laws create obstacles for transgender people? And where do we see some of the strictest voter ID laws?
Sure, yeah. So voter ID laws disproportionately impact trans people because trans people are more likely to have IDs without the name that they go by and the gender marker that reflects how they present. And recent research shows that just over 200,000 eligible trans voters in 31 states that both conduct their elections mostly in person and require or request ID at the polls don't have IDs that reflect their gender identities and the names they go by. And, you know, the states that have the strictest voter ID laws are mostly concentrated in the South and Midwest. So Tennessee, Wisconsin, Kansas. So voters there are going to be most affected.
Let's talk about the process of changing identification for transgender people. I know it can be difficult, even voter laws aside. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so bear with me here because it's a list. I spoke to Alex Corona in Milwaukee, a trans woman who had to complete this process when she was in college. And she told me that in Milwaukee County, first you have to go before a judge to file a name change petition. Then you have to publish notice of your name change in a local paper for 3 weeks, and anyone can challenge your name change during that time. Then you go before a judge again, and then you have to go update your name with various state and federal agencies like the DMV and the Social Security Office. And in some counties and other states, you also have to get your fingerprints taken at a local police department and also undergo a criminal background check. And this has become even more difficult in recent years because a lot of states have passed laws restricting whether or even how you can change your gender marker on your driver's license, for instance, which is only possible in Tennessee, for example, if you show proof of surgery.
Joe, being transgender while actually voting can be dangerous, especially in states where the so-called culture wars are raging. I know you spoke with someone about their experience at the ballot box. What did they tell you? And does that experience seem reflective of the fear that transgender people in general experience while voting?
Sure, yeah. I spoke to Henry Seaton, who voted for the first time in 2016 when he turned 18, and he told me that he went to his local polling place, which was in a conservative Nashville suburb, and he showed his ID to the poll worker, and at the time he had legally changed his name. He was presenting as masculine, but his ID still said female because of those barriers I talked about to change your gender marker on IDs in Tennessee. So the poll worker was very confused and had to call over another poll worker, and it took a lot of time, and he had to out himself as trans. And he ended up being able to go in and vote, but he said a lot of people around him were looking at him suspiciously because they saw that he had been flagged by the poll workers. And he said that it's incredibly dangerous for trans people, due both to the wave of anti-trans legislation that we've seen, but also in states like Tennessee, where you've seen 5 anti-trans bills become law last year. And so those combination of the two make that kind of thing at the polls very dangerous for trans voters.
Important issue. Joe Yurcaba, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. It never ceases to amaze me how the mainstream liberal media can manage to push such hot garbage on their viewers and retain any credibility whatsoever, right? It's probably the reason why they don't have any credibility. It is running with silly stories and narratives like this, okay, which they want you to believe. They want you to believe that voter ID laws are racist, first and foremost, even though there is no evidence to back up that claim, right? We have record voter turnout in all these states that they claim are suppressing or taking away the rights of black people to vote. But never mind that, right? So we got to move on to the next narrative here, right? The next narrative is that, well, they're transphobic, right? Voter ID laws are transphobic. And the reason why voter ID laws are transphobic is because trans people had to jump through extra hoops in order to vote or to make sure they are properly registered to vote in virtue of being trans, because transgender individuals change their names, they change their, or they try to change their gender, their sex on their IDs and stuff like that. And that stuff doesn't necessarily match their voter registration records. So therefore, it's disproportionately impacting trans people, aka it's transphobic. Not only that, they don't stop there. They also go as far as to say that voting for trans people is a potentially dangerous activity. Because you got to remember, you're voting in the South, right? You vote in the South with all the racist bigots that don't want you to vote anyways, right? Again, this is a narrative that is being pushed by NBC's transgender. I believe this is their transgender propaganda artist, right? That when you go to the polls as a trans person, it's dangerous because the poll worker may ask questions about your identity. And at that point, you have to be outed as trans. And then everybody else in line is looking at you weirdly because the poll workers have questions, which has created a dangerous environment for trans people. It's kind of funny because you would think this person would actually cite some real statistics on how many trans people have been mugged or hurt while voting, right? How many of them? He gave us an anecdotal story of one of his friends that, claims that, he felt uncomfortable because he had to reveal that he was trans in order to make sense of why in the world is that person's records not matching, right? So again, they want you to think that because you have to jump through extra hoops, because we have to make sure that our elections have integrity, somehow, some way, this is targeting trans people. You're trying to keep trans people from voting. Again, I wonder what is the solution for these people? What do you want? Do you not want there to be any ways of ensuring that people are who they say they are? Because here's the thing. It's not like any of these people were denied the right to vote. All they had to do is just fix a discrepancy, which is what happens a vast majority of times, even in these states with so-called racist and strict voter ID laws. All you have to do is just fix a discrepancy. A lot of times you're allowed to do that right at the polling station, right? All these trans people, I've looked at other stories as well too of transgender individuals that claim discrimination. They make all these claims about, 200,000 trans people may not be able to vote. But then in the story, they say, well, the transgender people were ultimately able to vote, right? Because what do? They followed the rules, right? They went by the guidelines. They followed the rules that are in place that everybody has to jump through to make sure that our elections are safe, okay? Once they follow the rules, they're able to vote. So tell me, how is it transphobic? Because if you change your name, your voter registration and the name on your ID needs to match, right? They need to match. We need to make sure you are who you say you are. And because you have changed who you are, yes, you're going to have to jump through extra hoops, right? I mean, it's really that simple. It should be expected. But no. We have to come out here and use transgender people simply having to follow the same rules that everybody else follows, okay? When there's some sort of discrepancy. No. That's transphobic. That is the reason why we got to get rid of election integrity laws, right? We can't have election integrity laws. Again, I wonder what is the ideal voting system for these Democrats? Because again, in some of these Democrat-run states, their laws are just as strict in the red states. But they're not boohoo whining and crying about those states. They only boohoo whine and cry about the red states. It's almost as if they simply want lax election integrity laws in red states only, right? So that all the people that, would vote Democrats, like, I don't know, illegals, wokes, young people, young college students that really don't want to vote, make it as easy as possible to vote. So, hey, we can vote those Republicans out, but we're not going to apply those same standards to our states. right, with strict laws. It's only racist and transphobic in red states, right? That's the only states we're actually worried about. But here's my controversial opinion on the whole idea that voter ID is racist or transphobic or bigoted in some way, whatever, right? They'll start saying sex is next. They'll say whatever, okay? Look, if you're not intelligent enough to get an ID and to follow the rules of your state, then maybe you shouldn't vote, right? It's really that simple. It's really that simple. That should be the response. Because I don't think it's a good idea for everybody to vote. I don't think everybody should vote because everybody's not informed enough to vote. If you're not informed enough to understand the rules and to be able to get an ID, right, to make sure it matches, that everything is good to go, regardless of not you're just doing a simple name change, or if you're transgender, then maybe you shouldn't vote. It's really that simple. Again, I think having some of these laws in place are good just in the sense of, well, it does weed out people who probably shouldn't vote. Because again, if you don't have an ID, you haven't figured out how to get one, right, or whatever, I got questions about whether or not, again, you have enough information to go out and vote. Again, voting is a skill, right? Voting is a skill. And I think that's what's missing from this conversation about voter ID. It's like, well, I just support voter ID in virtue of the fact that, again, it weeds out people who probably shouldn't be voting in the first place, right? People that don't follow the rules, that can't understand the rules, or that simply don't have an ID, don't want to get an ID because you need an ID to be a productive citizen of society. If you don't have an ID, you're probably not a productive citizen in society, right? You need an ID to basically do anything. So again, if you're not really a productive citizen, should you really be voting? Right? I'm just saying. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.